come across a lot of buyers who always tell me what their dream is. I want to get a rental and have some rental income. I want to just downsize to a ranch. It's what most people are wanting to do right now. But you'd be surprised at the number of people who tell me that they would like to have a tiny house somewhere. Lots of misconceptions about tiny houses out there. There are a lot of people who think that they can just actually bring in a little house and set it on an existing piece of land with another house. There are also people who think that they can just bring in a little building and start living in it without any improvements made. So let's kind of set the record straight on some problems with tiny houses. To have a real tiny house, they cost a premium in terms of price per square foot. So one would think that the bigger houses would actually be more expensive per square foot, but the opposite is actually true. And I've been told this by a builder. The smaller the house, the higher the price per square foot. So you actually do a bit better in the long run, new construction-wise, building a larger home than you do a smaller home in terms of price per square foot and bang for your buck. So they cost a lot of money. Another thing you have to consider is that there are a lot of areas, and most areas, where there's a minimum square footage to building anything to live in, any dwelling. So if you're looking at building a tiny house, there are townships in this area where the minimum is 1,400 square feet. So the township is not going to let you just go in and build a little tiny box of a house. They're just not going to do it. So you got to meet some square footage requirements in most locations. The cost of improvements also have to be factored in. I've had a lot of buyers in the past who think, well, I'll just go set this modular home or this manufactured home or this tiny house down on this land and be okay. The only problem is that you have to have water and you have to have some kind of a sewer system. You have to have a driveway going back to that tiny house. And what about a garage or a carport to protect your vehicle? There's a lot to the cost of improvements in order to actually be able to live in that place and make it work. Those have to be factored in, and they're not going to be any cheaper for a tiny house than they would be for, a modular, manufactured, or a stick-built home. The improvements are still going to cost what they cost, and there's quite a lot to think about there. Also, there are people who think that they can go buy a shed or an outbuilding and turn it into a house. I've got some land listed, and people call me up and say they want to put up a pole barn. What that's really code for is they think they're going to build a pole barn on that property and live there. And I've got to tell you, when I tell them to call the township's all over that. They know what people mean. As soon as you build that pole barn and you start getting permits for water and for sewer, people are going to know what's up. They're going to know that you're going to try to turn that pole barn into a house. That takes skill. It takes plans. It takes design to take such a large pole barn structure and actually start planning out a floor plan. You've got to do that very carefully or you wind up with some really crazy stuff. So again, everything's got to be built to single family code that's required by the county. You can't just go and do whatever you want wherever you want. There's zoning requirements, there's code. So keep that in mind too. You can't just live in a shed or an outbuilding that doesn't meet a single family dwelling set of codes. And I've got to be honest with you, the tiny houses are going to be tougher on resale. They're tight. You have to give up a lot of amenities and luxuries that most people aren't willing to give up. So it's like any type of new construction. When you build it, it's great, but you got to think about resale on the other end. And people tell me, well, this is my last stop. My kids are going to have to worry about that. Well, think about your kids, because they don't need to inherit something that they can't sell and that they don't want to live in. So keep that all in mind as you consider the tiny house. They are perfect for some people. And if you've got the money and you've got the appropriate land and you can meet build requirements and regulations, it can be a really nice way to live. But it's not as cheap as people think it is. So do your homework on this. Make sure you really know what you're doing. And make it worth your while for For your children who inherit this property, have a plan as to how you can resell it in the future, because that day will come for them. And, you might be thinking it's their problem, but it'll be their problem. If you have questions about tiny houses or anything else real estate related, you can always call me at 513-236-1254, or you can private message me. And if you're watching this on YouTube, please feel free to subscribe. Thanks. Bye.